Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
Now, as a young man, I was studying abroad, and then I had challenges. I got credit cards. The credit cards were maxed up. There were various financial challenges that I had, where now you have basically the amount of money that you have, you are probably spending it a little bit more than you should. And at the end of the day, you end up with financial challenges of having quite a lot of the month left at the end of your money.
Yeah.
So basically, there are 2 weeks left and you are running out of money. And the issue was now, what is happening? How do I get out of that? And it was around that time that I said, no, something has got to give. I have got to do something, because I cannot keep on going through this cycle. One of the first things that I did was to cut up the credit cards. Completely cut up the credit cards, get rid of it, and start paying off that debt that I had and other debts that I had. And in the process, I had to learn, okay, how do I budget? How do I look after my money so that I don't go through the same things around again? And it was around that I started to get my house in order. And it is in getting my house in order that I learned for myself that there are simple things that you can do, and that's where it all started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's not very easy. I mean, getting into debts and all that sort of thing is easy, but getting out of it is the most difficult one.
Indeed.
With inflation, sometimes there's no increment in your salary. You might have then to cut down on your spending and whatnot. But I mean, for an adult man like yourself and me, where do you even start? Because the house, probably you're already bonded to
Yes.
that.
Yes.
The car, you can't be driving a car and then suddenly you're taking a yango to work.
Yes.
Which bits do you cut to come back on track?
Yeah. And that's where now the challenge that we have, there are so many issues and there are so many challenges. There are some that you can cut, there are others that you cannot cut. But impulse spending, which these books are about, is one of those things which to some extent you can have control over it. Lots of people don't think they do have control over it. Now, the advertising, the emotional challenges that we have, the frustrations and stuff would often allow us to spend money that we could have actually withheld, or sometimes money that we don't have on impulsive buying.
Yeah.
It's a good example is you often would go into any of the supermarkets to buy bread, milk, and sugar. When you come out of there, you have got three bags of groceries. And then the thing is that now, after you have paid, you feel that, yes, some of the things that you have bought are actually even at home. But you do that, and that's that impulsive buying. And that's where the challenge is. Those are the low-hanging fruits where you can at least say, okay, let me not buy. For instance, at a place like your office here, there will be somebody walking around here with burgers, with brechens and stuff like that, walking up and down the street. Now, sometimes you have actually taken your lunch with you, but that person comes to the reception down there, and you are standing there at the reception, and you decide that, no, let me just get an extra brechen. And yet, you have got lunch.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, your lunch is forgotten. You might eat it in dinner. And those kind of things are where you start, where you can say, okay, this I can control. I cannot control the car payment or the mortgage. Those are standard payments. But there are small things. Okay, you hear that, okay, Edgar is having a sale. And then the thing is, you're just walking past there. Whether you are going to go in there and buy that suit while you have a few more suits already in your cupboard are some of those things that you can control, and that's where you start. These ones that you can control, you start tweaking here and there. Eventually, you gradually learn also that no. Initially, it's people say it's difficult. Yeah, lots of things are difficult, but you have got to start. And once you start saying, okay, do I really need that brechen? Do I really need that boerewors? Do I really need that biltong? Then you can say, no, not today. I say to my kids, you had this. Maybe let's skip today.
Yeah.
And initially they had a problem, but then they said, okay, Daddy, I had a nice cheesecake, so I'm not gonna buy that biltong today. Now,
Yeah.
that's those small things, you can actually start with those. And then eventually we can look at others.
Yeah. How do you deal with the emotional side of things? Because if you feel like you are getting poorer because inflation is going up, but your income is stagnant, and then you start cutting down on some things. I mean, maybe your DSTV package, you used to pay this one that includes soccer channels and all, like for some of us. But eventually, maybe you cut only to news channels and whatnot. How do you deal with the psychological trauma that comes with really living with little than you used to?
Yeah. Now, actually, that emotional issue around money is not just about depriving yourself. Spending itself is emotional.
Yeah.
Spending is emotional, and then the thing is, first we have got to accept that the triggers that allow us to spend, even impulse spending, is emotional. Now, instead of looking at things as depriving yourself, I often used to ask, what is going to happen to me if I don't have a $800 or $900 bouquet of DSTV and I only pay $350 or $299 for the smaller one? And what I have come to learn is, initially you feel frustrated, but you come to terms with these things. It's the action of starting to do something. It's the action of starting to say, okay, I will do with less here. I'm not saying people should altogether cut off some of these things like emotional spending. I'm saying take back control. At the moment, control is somewhere else. All those loans that you have, revolving loans, control your income. I habitually used to come back home and then I'd pay up my mother's account at some of these places and I'd close it. And they'll manage perfectly well for 6 months. And then they'll go and find themselves back. And then I ask why, what happens. And lots of times they learn that actually you can do without. So although as emotional as it is, you have got to ask yourself, how does it deprive you? Does it reduce your quality of life? And the answer is no, not necessarily. But then the thing is, you just learn to do things slightly differently from the way you wanted to do. I mean, lots of people have got all those channels on TV and stuff like that. Most of them that they don't use. And when it is missing, you realize you make do without. I've stopped taking sugar. Initially, I struggled with the fact that I don't want to take sugar. I'm used to it. It's not a big deal. I've gotten on with it and nothing happened.
Yeah, because I think that to change habits, both for your own health, but also for your financial health, is also a big challenge. There are guys who used to have beer, now they say, nah, beer is no longer my stuff, both for my health, but the fact that you're not sitting in a bar with friends every weekend again, and you are 5 guys, and somehow you have to buy a round for everybody, it's a lot. Now, one chapter here in the book, chapter 2, talks about the myths, and there's a line that says, another common misconception is that budgeting alone can solve the problem. If you can expand on what you mean by that.
Yeah. Now, lots of times people think that because they can sit down and draw up a list of what they are going to spend, that solves the behavior problem. Budgeting is a good thing to do, and that behavior is a good thing to do. But often what I ask people that I'm training is, how do you decide when you sit down and work out your budget? How do you decide how much you have spent on what? And more often than not, we have actually found out that people pull the numbers out of thin air. They don't actually write down what their actual spending is. Now, then there is a problem there, that you are actually not reflecting what you do. You are reflecting what you think the budget should be. So I say, honey, how much did you spend on petrol? and then we say, let's just say 3,000. Then I write down 3,000. What about food? I think 3,500. Now, those numbers are not real numbers, but we have got also there in the book, we are saying, no. Budgeting itself is not enough, but there are things that you can do to help the process, and that's tracking your income comes and then supports the budget, because if you have been tracking your income, at the end of the month, you've got a spreadsheet that says this is how much you actually spent on food, this is how much you spent on petrol, and therefore when you put the numbers, now you are saying this is how much I spent on petrol last time. Do I really want to spend that much? Why don't I decide this time? Now you are taking control in that you are saying this is how much I want to spend, as opposed to giving us an idea of what the realistic budget should look like. Your budget is informed by you having tracked your spending for a couple of weeks, and that's what you use. And that's why I'm saying just sitting down and working out the budget is not enough. But if you're tracking your spending before you actually sit down and write your budget, it is realistic. And because it's based on what you have actually done, now you can tweak it and say that if I don't always go and visit my sisters every day after work, maybe I'd save a little bit of petrol, and therefore we are saying, okay, instead of spending 4,000 on petrol, we might be spending 3,500. So yes, budgeting by itself is not enough, but if we're combining it with tracking what we have been spending, now it makes the budget a little bit more realistic, and that's what I mean by what I'm saying there.
Absolutely.
Namibia is a land of movement, with waves that never stop reaching forward. Here, adventure is not something we search for. It is something we are born into. In every corner of this country, creativity rises, from artists, from athletes, from dreamers. And when the world comes to explore Namibia, they discover something extraordinary. Because when sport moves people, creativity moves ideas, and tourism moves the world toward us, something powerful happens. A platform where movement meets imagination, where industries connect, where opportunity grows, where Namibia's next chapter begins. Welcome to the Creative Sport Tourism Expo. Exhibit, partner, experience. Creative Sport Tourism.
Consider the Copper is a company that I founded about 6 years ago. It's basically the owner of all the Ongopolo mines in Namibia.
Okay.
And you know, our mantra is in the name. We look to consolidate as much of the copper mining process in Namibia as possible.
Tapping into your vast experience in the industry, please help us understand, why does the world needs to diversify its copper supply at the moment?
Well, copper is one of the oldest commodities, oldest gold,
Yes.
and known to mankind. What's happened recently, and primarily the usefulness of copper is a conductor of electricity. And what's happened recently in the new sort of industrialization, if I can call it that, or iteration of global economics development, we've seen the advent of the EV industry, and also we're seeing the need for AI database.
Okay.
So all of that means that there's been a massive paradigm shift in terms of the demand for copper. And however, the supply, there still exists a serious supply gap that will take a while to fill. And that's why copper is now probably the most critical mineral in terms of future advancement in EV or AI.
And how is that translated into recent and future trends in terms of the price of copper?
Well, currently, as things go, the world is a bit up and down
Yes.
because of all the issues that are going. Copper historically is a GDP tracking a product, but the future of copper is actually quite positive in terms from a price point of view, because again, as I mentioned earlier, there continues to be the gap between supply and demand, and that will continue for quite a while. On average, to bring a copper mine to production from exploration to production, it's roughly about 17 years. So the supply response is not as quick as the market would have it.
Yeah.
And because of that strain, we see the next 3, 4, 5 years a very strong sort of copper pricing environment.
Okay, excellent. That's good news. But in terms of Namibia and our copper mining operations, what sets us apart as a country, as a jurisdiction? What advantages do we have?
Namibia has a lot of advantages. I mean, it's a vast country, first of all.
Yeah.
You've got a very skilled workforce, which is good. But one of the most important things from my point of view and other investors' point of view is that as a jurisdiction, there's a rule of law, there's predictability, there's efficiency within government. I mean, there is bureaucracy and everything, but it works well, and we believe that you can actually invest there for the long term. From a copper perspective, there's so much more to be done in terms of exploration. I believe that Namibia is significantly underexplored from a copper point of view. And I think in the future, with all the infrastructure that's been built, I noticed the expansion that's going on in sort of Walvis Bay. Namibia is a really good supply train for the SADC region. And I think as we go on, as we intend to do more exploration, I notice a lot of companies that are coming here to do more exploration on the mining side, but also getting all the infrastructure ready for the oil and gas in the future puts Namibia in a very strong position, I think.
Okay. Let's focus a bit more on CCC. What's your current levels of production? How does the outlook look for the rest of the year?
Well, CCC is not fully in production yet. We're doing what I would say residual copper, which is a test really to test our plants in Chudi in the north. And really what we've been doing there is retreating some of the old heaps to make sure that we understand the metallurgy, understand the various species of copper that's available there, and also test the plant. We actually produce copper cathode,
Okay.
which is to LME standard, and thus far, all our production has been excellent in quality. So our plan now, we've done extensive drilling in Chudi. We are almost completed with our feasibility study. In both Chudi and Central Ops, we've invested over $1 billion NAM. We intend to invest more. My plan is to inject the final capital within the next 3 to 6 months into Chudi to go into full operation.
Awesome. Awesome. And what will that mean for jobs?
Well, obviously, I mean, in the Tsumeb area, Tsumeb is a town that was quite heavily dependent on mining jobs,
Yes.
not just from Consolidated Copper, Ongopolo, as it's known there. You also had Cinnamon and various other groups there. When Chudi is in full fling, we'll probably be employing about 1,000 people, including contractors, so which will make a huge difference in the local economy.
Yes, that'll make a huge difference.
Yeah.
There's a term that is used often as brownfields. Would you mind explaining to us what that term actually means, and then adding on to elaborate about the brownfields projects in your own portfolio?
Brownfields is essentially old mines that have already got sort of been built before, for whatever reason, stopped.
Okay.
So you typically you would know the ore body.
Yeah.
You'll have a plant that perhaps needs upgrading. And the advantage that we have in Consolidated Copper is both our mines, Ochihazi and in Chudi, we already have existing plants. And the ore body was fairly well known, although we're doing extensive drilling to redefine it and to extend the life of mine. And what a brownfield as opposed to greenfield does, it's just shortened that time period to production.
I see.
Because you've already got spent infrastructure.
In terms of the extra drilling and exploration, have the methods and the technology changed?
Not particularly. I mean, the reason why we did more drilling, when we first acquired the company, it had a 3-year mine life. I'm talking the Chudi mine.
Yeah.
And having spent quite a lot of money drilling extensively, not just where the pit was, but around the pit. And we can now safely say we've probably got 15 years of mining left
Wow.
in Chudi. So we just improved the resource. We've managed from 2023 to now add about another 30 million tons into our resource. So that's essentially what the drilling does. And we're now repeating the same thing in Central Ops to try and increase that resource as well.
You mentioned Chudi and you mentioned Ochahaze, but Matchless is also part of your portfolio.
Matchless and Ochahaze form what we call central operations.
Okay.
Basically, the plant is at Ochahaze. That's what we always refer to Ochahaze.
Yeah.
We have an 8,000 ton per annum plant that sits there, and we have Matchless where we'll be mining and in Ochahaze and feed that plant.
Oh, I see. I see. And will you truck the ore from
We'll
Matchless?
truck the ore. We'll do some ore sorting at site to reduce the volume that you have to move. So you upgrade your ore and then truck it to Central Ops or Ochahaze.
Okay. I want us to go back to Namibia's place in the whole copper supply chain, especially in light of the geopolitical changes that are happening. Do you think that Namibia has a role to play in further unlocking the potential in Africa, or in maybe as a conduit? Well, how do you see the country in the future in terms of the copper supply chain?
I think it has a significant role to play in the future. It's not as explored as Zambia or Congo, perhaps, but there's plenty of copper in Namibia, and the copper demand is going to be there. I mean, the future is electrification in essence, and that means the future is copper, and so Namibia has a definitive role to play there. I think, it needs to improve more in terms of infrastructure, because some of those deposits are quite remote. So that means roads, that means power generation. And I think the government wants to see beneficiation. And if you're going to do beneficiation, one of the main contributors to that will be, cheap power.
Yeah.
So we beneficiate up to a cathode level, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of people do make concentrate, and which we will do in Ochahaze. But there's the opportunity in the future to do a lot more beneficiation and even building factories. Copper wiring factories in Namibia, because it's well positioned to supply SADC and also to ship outside through Walvis Bay.
And do you think there's a potential for more smelting of copper in Namibia? I know that there's a revamp going on at the plant there in Tsumeb.
Yes, with Cinnamon, yes. There is a potential for that. I mean, most copper would probably go into the smelting way, into making a concentrate. And in my view, Namibia is not producing a quarter of what it can potentially do.
Oh, wow.
So I think there's a massive growth plan, and I know that there's some companies that are doing serious exploration on the market and finding huge volumes of copper. And in the next 3 to 5 years, I would expect to move them to come into full production.
Earlier, when we were talking about Namibia as a jurisdiction, you mentioned that it's a good place to invest with the long term. But recently, with our now recent previous Minister of Industries, Mines and Energy, he was talking about the 51%. At the same time, while we sometimes hear such talk, the Minerals Act has not changed significantly since it was adopted, although there have been 2 small amendments.
Yes.
But do you think that it's like just lots of noise but no real changes, or do you think that the jurisdiction is going to go through significant changes soon?
Well, I think that is a good question. Thank you for answering it. I think I always like to look at the question as to why that arises in the first place.
Yeah.
And I can understand government and people's yearning to own, because it's a national resource in essence.
Yeah.
To arbitrarily change this number and say that you will own 51% is actually not good for investment.
Yes.
It will put off a lot of investors, because obviously you're putting your capital, and there has to be a reasonable way of ownership in terms of participation, either by resource or by capital. My ownership of CCC is by the investment we've made in CCC.
Yes.
And I think that there are conversations to be had with the government in terms of how there could be more local participation, but more in an overall economic way, how the country can benefit better. And I think the government is on the right track when it talks about beneficiation. And I think the government will do well to loosen up the exploration areas, but so we can, prove up more resources and go into more mining. But an arbitrary number like 51% without thinking about what goes behind it, I don't think is helpful to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cisse.